Vladni podcast GOVSI.
Lep pozdrav v novem podkastu GOVSI. Pred vami je seveda nov podcast in prinašamo vam dve novosti. Namreč novo akcijo, novo platformo Ustavimo Dezinformacije. Lahko jo tudi tukaj preberemo preBERI, preMISLI, preVERI, Ustavimo Dezinformacije. In tudi tokrat imamo gosta iz tujine, prihaja iz Estonije oziroma iz Bruslja, kjer se ukvarja z dezinformacijami oziroma fenomenom, ki je v zadnjem obdobju zelo prisoten. So, we are now talking to Siim Kumpas, who is an expert for fighting and tackling disinformation.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me. As said, my name is Siim Kumpas. I currently work at the European External Action Service, which is, to put it short, the foreign ministry of the EU, with some differences to national foreign ministries, but in essence. And my role there, coming from Estonia and having worked on this in Estonia before, is supporting the team that works with what we would call foreign information manipulation and interference. The idea really there is that we are trying to figure out how to best protect EU's neighborhood against malign activities, especially in the information environment, be it disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. We're trying to stop governments like the Russian one, the Chinese one, from interfering in the information environment next to the EU.
That means that you are focused on external affairs. That means not member states of the European Union, for example, but you are focused on third states. That means Russia, China, and are there any other states who are like dangerous in that field?
You're correct, exactly. We do not work or focus on European member states because that is not the task that we have been given by the member states themselves. They gave us a task to look outside of the EU, and there the main threats do come from Russia and to a lesser and different extent, but still to a great degree from China. When you ask about other governments, are they also active in trying to interfere in EU's matters? There are others as well, but when we talk about who are the governments that we are looking at in our team at the EAS, these are two countries. These are Russia and these are China, because they are the ones who have proven to be the biggest threats to the EU.
Okay, for example, maybe you know much more about that, but Slovenia, if you are familiar with that, Slovenia expelled a Russian diplomat a few weeks ago because of the extensive propaganda they used against Slovenian national interest. That was an explanation. How big is that Russia propaganda from your perspective? What is going on that field, informational war?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is huge, and there are different ways to explain or exemplify how big the problem is. We can maybe start from numbers. If we look at how much is Russia, for example, investing in only their state-controlled outlets such as Sputnik, RT, and several others. Last year, the number was around 1.5 billion euros with a B.
That means that the Russian government invested that quantity of so much money into the propaganda through their media.
Exactly, and this is only the part that we know of, because this is what they publicly said. In addition to those media outlets, and I use air quotes because they don't really act as journalists or media, we are well aware how they use their intelligence services and other branches of the government to interfere and meddle in our matters. So we know that the actual number is much, much bigger. And just to give you a context, I mean, the budget of the EAS to work on strategic communications, to work on countering this information manipulation, is roughly about 100 times smaller than the amount I just gave you. So this shows how asymmetrical the task is that we have in the hand. And we're currently talking just about Russia. You have to add this to this China, who has even bigger budgets to work on whatever they want. So this is the nature of the problem that we're facing. It is a very asymmetrical threat in terms of funding, but also in terms of what are the rules of the game. What I mean by that is when we try to counter Russia's disinformation and information manipulation, we have to do that following certain ethical and moral standards, because of obvious reasons. These
which are freedom of speech, and
this is the one that we talk about the most: freedom of speech, freedom of the media, freedom of opinion, freedom of association, etc. But when you look at how, for example, the Kremlin operates, they don't care about that at all. On the contrary, they use our openness against us. So they're trying to kind of take our open nature and make this vulnerability of us, and this is something I think we don't have to get carried away by what they're doing, and we have to face the openness of us and not worry too much. It is not a weakness, it's a strength. It shows that we can cope as democratic, open societies.
The last example was the Voice of Europe,
an especially cynical one, given the name, of course.
Yes, yeah. Voice of Europe.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's interesting. And there other, I don't know, portals and medias like Voice of Europe, which can we expect some new cases, some new? It will show up in the future. What can you say about that?
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but if we didn't see any new kind of outlets such as Voice of Europe in the future, I would eat my hat, or as the saying goes, because we have been looking at how Russia operates for years. On the EU level, we've been doing since 2015. It's almost 10 years soon. But our member states some of them have been doing it for much longer, especially if we look at the Baltic states, the Nordic states, Poland, and a few others. They have been keeping an eye on Russia for decades. And we know just out of sheer experience that this is how they operate. And for them, and by them I mean the Kremlin, Russia's government regime, information is a different thing than here in the West, in democratic countries. For them, information it's a tool, not to say a weapon. And especially if we, for example, look at how they have used information operations hand in hand with military attacks against Ukraine, it goes to show how integrated these information operations are in their case with their military operations, with their diplomatic efforts and everything else. It is a part of their core part of their thinking and the way they operate.
What kind of methodology they use? What kind of tools they are using? How that the spread of this disinformation is going on? What is the pattern? How can we recognize that? What would you suggest to, I don't know, member states, governments? Because there is no European policy about that, correct?
Well, there are policies on that, if I'm correct, actually, because the EU has been working on the problem, as said, for almost 10 years now. We really started moving after Russia first invaded Ukraine back in 2014. After that, there have been several different, policy initiatives, papers, but I'm not going to go into the details of those because it can get a bit boring and bureaucratic. Instead, what I'll say is that we have teams in place to look at it, such as ours at the EAS, but we also have teams in the European Commission. We have teams in the European Parliament, for example, who specifically at the moment look at election interference. They look at how Russia is trying to interfere in European elections. We have new laws that we didn't have some years ago. We have laws that force social media platforms such as Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, or X as it's called now, to be more open about what is going on their platforms, share data with researchers, provide more kind of tools and options for users to better protect themselves, and so on and so forth. So the EU is doing quite a bit, but this is not a problem that the EU can solve from Brussels, because Russia rarely attacks Brussels. They much more often attack single member states, because it's the old kind of divide and conquer tactic. You select, you try to break your victim down into smaller pieces and then attack those pieces. So this is why I'm saying that is EU member states, all of them really have to be ready and work at it and really invest money, time and effort into understanding how Russia is particularly interfering in their information environment, and then take steps as needed.
From Brussels perspective, which countries, which member states are weakest part of that chain tackling disinformation? Which countries? Hungary, Slovakia, or I don't know, Slovenia?
Being from the diplomatic service, I will not name a single country here, but what I can say is I think the countries that are the weakest are not necessarily the countries that are immediately facing Russia when we look at the map, because the countries that are immediately next to Russia, even though they might be most open to the threat on the one hand, on the other hand, they have all understood that this is a serious threat to them, meaning they have taken steps. So I think the further anybody is from Russia, the less steps they have taken to actually protect themselves from Russia. So that's what I can say.
Mm-hmm. That your suggestion would be that every member state should provide software for tackling disinformation, and that software should include what kind of tools they should provide.
It's not just about software. So the way,
but software.
Yeah.
Right, no?
Well, I get what you mean. So the way we look at it in Brussels is that you need a couple of big things. First of all, you need to understand what the threat is. So you need what we would call a situational awareness. But it's nothing more or less than just, again, understanding who are the threat actors, who are trying to attack us. How are they trying to attack us? What are they doing? What are the methods, the behaviors that they are using? What are the networks that they are trying to build, etc., and so on? And third, what are they saying? So what are the narratives? What are the messages? What is the content that are trying to sell us, if you will? So that is the first step. Whoever wants to do anything about the problem on a serious level, on a systematic level, needs to first understand what the threats are. And this also includes asking people about what they think, conducting public opinion polls, because even if we know what, let's say, Russia is putting on the table, we need to understand, is anybody picking that up? Are people actually believing and buying the narratives that Russia is trying to sell us? Now, if we know that, only then we can start building solutions. And when we talk about solutions, there are, again, many things that can be done and are already being done. One of the first and most important ones for me that I always mention is awareness in the shortest sense of the word. And what I mean by that, we need people to understand and feel that there is a threat. Because if let's say governments or decision makers don't understand the threat, they are not motivated to invest money, to create teams, to support the issue politically. If individuals don't understand that there is an actual threat in the kind of the information they consume, they will not pick up any media literacy advice or campaigns by the government telling them to stop and think. So they need to understand that there is a threat, but at the same time, we don't want people to panic. We don't want them to kind of imagine the threat being bigger than it actually is. And there is an interesting and kind of ironic twist there in that we've seen attempts by Russia to actually make themselves seem bigger than they actually are. There are examples when they claim that they decide who, for example, will be the next US president, which is absurd. We do know that Russia interfered several times to US presidential elections. That is a proven fact, but at the same time, it is also a proven fact that their effect to the outcome of the elections was limited, to put it very mildly. So maybe a few percentage points here and there, if even at all, but to actually claim that they chose the US president, and they do that just to intimidate us, to make us kind of believe that no matter what we do, we cannot protect ourselves. So we're trying to aim that sweet spot somewhere in the middle, not too little awareness, not panic, something in between. And there are many other things we can do on top of that, like invest in media literacy initiatives, meaning we can educate people how to be more critical and sensible information consumers, especially on social media, because that is, even though it's not a new medium anymore, there are still people, we're not accustomed to social media as much as we are accustomed to, let's say, radio or TV or newspapers. So there is still room for education and trainings and many other things.
You're describing a whole society approach, as much
Exactly.
as I understand, because
Exactly.
I don't know, what do you think, but how government can tackle the disinformation if government is too much active in that field? Some could say that they are forcing some kind of censorship, or it's the other side of the same coin. It could be a problem that.
You're absolutely correct that overreacting to the problem can become a bigger problem than the original problem itself, and this is why we absolutely believe, and not just believe, but act according to what you just said, a whole of society approach, because this is a problem that concerns each and every layer of the society. So by definition, the only way to hope to, I cannot say solve it, because we can never make, I personally believe we can never make governments such as the Kremlin stop using information as a weapon. But what we can do is we can make it more difficult for them. We can make it more costly. We can make it more time consuming, more energy consuming. That we can do. And the only way to do that really is to bring together all layers of the society. Media has a clear role to play. Private companies, of course, social media platforms, but not only. You have private companies, for example, who build excellent monitoring tools that researchers, that governments, that journalists need in their work to better detect and understand disinformation. So schools have their very clear role to play, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, the only long-term solution can lie in bringing, kind of connecting the dots. But I believe the convening power there has to be the government, because the government is the only part of the society that can bring together these different layers of the society. So I think government has a very clear role to play, but I fully agree that it cannot be a government-only approach, and it cannot be too heavy-fisted approach.
Europe is will have elections in 2 months. We will have elections. What kind of narrative? What kind of activities you detect? I don't know, from outside threats. what kind of patterns we can see, we can follow? What's going on that field?
So from our monitoring and from our analysis, we can see the past couple of months have still been fairly slow when it comes to Russians trying to interfere in our elections. Of course, there are cases of Russian spies being caught here and there, or there people having infiltrated some political offices across the EU or Brussels. But when it comes to specific narratives or messages or content on elections, there has not been a lot. But what we're seeing now is it is starting to grow. And this really corresponds with the theory. And the theory there is that the interference attempts get most active in the, let's say, 48 to 72 hours before the election. So this is why we're really preparing for that 2-3 days ahead of the elections. We're already monitoring, we're sharing information with EU member states, including Slovenia and everyone else. This is run by the European Parliament because they are overseeing the elections. But as said, we are seeing Russia getting more and more active. And if we, for example, talk about what are the messages that they are trying to use against EU member states ahead of the elections, there are a couple of things. First and foremost, of course, they are still pushing a lot on Ukraine. They are trying to support voices and people and parties who are more critical of supporting Ukraine, and they're really trying to have the EU lower its support to Ukraine. So that is one big kind of, let's say, cluster of or set of topics. The other big set of topics is trying to have people lose kind of confidence or trust in elections as such. One of the reasons they do that is if people don't trust the elections, what is the logical reaction? They don't go and cast their vote, meaning less people casting their vote, less legitimacy, maybe less people voting who would otherwise vote for sensible middle ground parties, and more people going to vote who will cast their vote for more kind of extreme or kind of fringe parties. So this is what we've seen so far. Attacking support to Ukraine and trying to kind of diminish the overall trust in elections, in the election system, and so forth.
What kind of approach they use in that in the way they're trying to achieve the goals? What kind of methods that they're using?
It's a very good question because we are more and more trying to, in our work, understand and detect the manipulative behaviors. And to put it simply, the content or the message itself is only one part of the puzzle. You can compare it, let's say there is a misleading message or narrative on EU support to Ukraine. But that is only the visible part of the iceberg. Much bigger part of the kind of information operation actually happens underground where we cannot see it. I often use the kind of comparison of a bullet and the gun. So a message targeting, for example, our support to Ukraine would be a bullet that hits an audience and in the worst case causes some harm or makes the victim think differently. But in addition to a bullet, you also have a gun. You have somebody who pulled the trigger, somebody who shot the gun, etc. So the same applies to disinformation. So yes, there is a message that reaches an audience and maybe makes people think or behave differently. But in order to actually, somebody had to create that message, somebody had to publish that message somewhere and disseminate, promote the message, because there is so much information out there. You can publish everything you want, but you have to make sure that it actually reaches people. And this is where we reach your question. You asked about what are they doing and how are they delivering these messages, and they are quite cunning there.
Can we locate those people or organizations?
these networks.
Yeah, network. Can we do that?
We are getting better and better at that, and we in Brussels, but also we as in the EU as a whole. There are several EU member states who have recently created new units, new agencies, and are also kind of shifting focus from content only to manipulative behavior more broadly. So that is why I'm saying we are getting better and better in detecting these networks of connected accounts, might be fake accounts, but might be genuine accounts. We, for example, have seen throughout the last year Russia using quite often not manipulated, but faked media. So they design something that looks like, let's say, the biggest newspaper in Slovenia, but actually if you open up the website, you can see that the address there is one letter different, but it looks 95% the same as the actual newspaper. And then maybe 9 stories on the newspaper or on the website are the same as actually posted on the newspaper. But then there is one story that is planted there. And this is something that we've actually seen tens and tens of times over the past year. They fake famous websites of Le Monde, Figaro, Deutsche Welle, and so on and so forth. And of course, not all people will fall for that. Many will maybe see that, but this is a fake website. But some people will not look at many people will maybe not look at the address line and go through it letter by letter. Is it exactly the same or not? So yeah, there are different ways that they're trying to deceive us.
Can you explain us the differences between misinformation, disinformation, fake news? It's confusing, we can say, for ordinary people.
Sure.
Please.
I would not even focus or stop on fake news at all. I will just say that this is a term that indeed was used, especially around 2016-17, around US presidential elections back then.
Can you stop you at that moment? Because then there was a term that fake news. That is just an alternative fact. No, there is no fake news. That's alternative facts. What is that? No, that was at that time the question was rising.
Exactly, and there are 2 big problems with the kind of the idea of fake news. First is content that is trying to mislead us, and behavior that is trying to mislead us is often not news. So it's fake news is just a wrong label, but more importantly, so the term fake news is very much politicized, especially in the US, but also here in Europe, in some countries. And we've seen several cases where politicians call everything fake news they don't like. There is a newspaper criticizing a populist politician. They would just say, but this is fake news. I don't know anything about this. So fake news is not really a good term, and I would kind of advise against using it. But if we jump from there to misinformation and disinformation, to put it very simply, I want to argue that for normal people, for average information consumers, it doesn't matter. It's all the same in the sense that. Again, I like bringing parallels and examples. I would here bring the parallel of being hit by a car. If you are the victim, it does not matter whether the driver wanted to hit you purposefully or it was just an accident. Maybe they, the sun shone in their eyes, they didn't see for a moment, or maybe they felt bad physically and they hit you because of that. You still get the same damage, the same hit. But from a policymaker point of view or like a professional point of view, there is a difference. And the difference is that misinformation is not intentional. So it is false or misleading information, but it is not intentionally created or disseminated. Whereas disinformation is also false and misleading, but it's knowingly so. When we talk about disinformation, we talk about somebody who is deliberately trying to deceive us, for political gains, for economic gains, or sometimes for personal reasons.
And there is another term, FIMI.
And then there is FIMI, which we are big fans of, not just because we came up with the term, but because we believe it captures the problem, the threat better. And FIMI that we use, FIMI is short for Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. This is, as I briefly already mentioned, this is looking at the broader picture. This is looking at manipulative behavior as well. And just to bring some practical examples, for this not to be too theoretical, let's say I own 10 fake accounts. Is this disinformation? No. But can I use those accounts if I want to push disinformation? Yes. So this is what I'm trying to say is like you have manipulative behavior that doesn't always fall under disinformation, but it's rather like a network that is needed, and infrastructure maybe is even a better word, that is needed in the first place to start pushing disinformation to different audiences. So this is why we are really working with the concept of FIMI. And maybe another important part of FIMI that is also doesn't fall under disinformation and is as problematic as other parts of it is if we look at especially what China is doing. We can talk about censorship. We can talk about suppressing independent voices, both within China and now more and more, of course, within Russia. Russia has really been picking up speed. Historically, if we look at the situation maybe 5 years ago, China was miles ahead of Russia when it came to domestic censorship, especially online. But now, ever since Russia's full-scale invasion more than 2 years ago, Russia has really cracked down on independent speech, online, offline. We can't really talk about the independent media in Russia anymore at all. If anything, it happens in exile outside of Russia. So this is also a big part of the puzzle, I would say. It's not just about what are autocratic governments such as Russia's and China's trying to kind of push towards us. It's also what are they trying to take away from the information environment, and what they are trying to take away are independent voices critical of their regime.
Yes, are there any differences between Russia and China and their strategies? You mentioned some of them. Where is the difference between those two big and important states on a global stage?
I mean, we know much more about Russia, and most analysts and researchers do, but we are learning every day on how China is operating. If you ask about differences and similarities, I would say there are quite a lot of differences still. Maybe the differences are not as big anymore as they were let's say 4 or 5 years ago, especially before the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean. But there are still differences. We can see that Russia is much more aggressive. They mainly try to put everybody else in bad light instead of trying to kind of promote themselves. Whereas China is still maybe using a more traditional or old school, if you will, type of propaganda. So they are also getting a bit more aggressive, especially again since the COVID-19 pandemic, but they are still mostly trying to boost themselves, their own image as a country, as a government. They're trying to show that their way of governing China is the best, that it's much better than traditional democracies, or not traditional democracies as such, because China is no democracy by any standard or definition. And also what else? I already mentioned information suppression or censorship. There, China is much more advanced still, especially online. I mean, there is practically no room left for independent activity that goes without the state noticing it on any of the social media platforms that are available to Chinese people, because almost all Western social media platforms and other platforms online are unavailable to people in China. And this is more and more becoming the case with Russia as well, even though there are still some open channels that can be used by Russians to reach out and others to reach Russians.
Disinformation phenomena is not new. You know that the strategies were used in history and mostly during the wars. But there is a new moment. It's technology. And here is also artificial intelligence. Where is the connection between these actual phenomena, disinformation and technology we are facing now? Where will we? What is the future of that connection? What will happen? Because it's accelerating and it's going fast.
A good question. Again, I if I only had a crystal ball, but what I can say is what we see so far, and what we see so far is that currently there has still been no revolution when it comes to kind of threats posed by technology to our information environment, to disinformation, information manipulation. Rather, there has been an evolution, so kind of a slow but steady incline of the scale, speed, and also tailorability. These are the three big things that technology is constantly changing. First, social media, and now AI. As you said, people have deceived other people since we were born as a species. This is unfortunately in our psychology. This is how we operate as human beings, some more than others, but there have always been people around us who knowingly lie and deceive, especially, as again you already is well summarized, during times of crisis, and war is just the kind of the biggest form of crisis you can imagine. What we see with AI is three things really. It makes it faster, easier, cheaper to deceive people. So this is like, even without knowing what the future will bring us, it is like conceptually working against what we're trying to do. Our whole aim is to make it, as I said earlier, to make it as hard for governments such as Russia and China to use information against us as a weapon. What AI is doing is making it easier. So there is this, on a kind of a basic level, this is the equation. But of course, when you get to the details, the nuances, we will see this unrolling throughout the next years. But I cannot see a way where AI will make our lives easier, let's put it that way.
And your job, probably.
Exactly, exactly.
And before the end, Siim, can you advise our listeners how to recognize disinformation, misinformation? What's the pattern they should be aware of?
There are many different advices out there, but I would maybe give people two ideas that I like the most. First, that is maybe the most important one for me, at least personally, and this is what I try to do as an individual, because I also consume information on a daily basis, is look at the source. Who is behind a piece of information? Is it just somebody you know? Is it an actual journalistic outlet? Is it a social media page that is anonymous? You can consume information from all of these sources, but you have to be aware that there you have journalistic outlets that have very clear standards to, what they do about, they have to be truthful and balanced and honest and so on, whereas these rules don't really apply to, let's say, influencers, for example. So this is the one piece of advice. Have in mind where is the information coming from, and depending on that, be more or less critical. The second one is that if a piece of information you come across on social media, on TV, radio, anywhere really, makes you emotional, either maybe a bit too happy or a bit too angry, then take a moment, breathe in 3-4 times, breathe out, think for a moment, pause for a moment, and then either react on it or not, because this is the very common technique by people wanting to deceive us. They package disinformation in a very kind of juicy, emotional package, if you will, meaning if we see something, we immediately and our hands almost start to tremble, and we want to push share or like or comment. But if something makes us feel like this, I think there is a high chance that even if it's not disinformation, it's still good to take 3 seconds, maybe brew a cup of coffee or have a cup of tea or water, come back to the computer or TV or radio, and then think again whether you still want to react the way you originally wanted to or not.
As our leaflet says,
exactly.
Think, preMISLI, think.
Exactly.
Yeah? And then check it out. We are at the end of the podcast. Time is up. So I suggest we end at that point. AI, artificial intelligence and bright future we are facing. Okay, thank you for your conversation, your time, and goodbye.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me, and best of luck. Bye-bye.